How my ancestor took down a racist businessman. This is an old story that's been told in my family for as long as I can remember. We're talking my grandfather was told it by his grandfather and so on. Note that this story has had close to 200 years to be embellished and twisted, so take everything with a grain of salt rather than just scream fake. Even if only a fourth of the story is true, it's still a great story. This is the story of my ancestor we'll call John, because that's the name I've always been told. John was a black man in America during the time when slavery was dying out, his grandparents having been brought there from Africa along with their children. John eventually was freed through some means. I've heard both that he paid his way out, or the state he was in abolished slavery and he was freed that way, and he found himself fighting in the Civil War because he felt it was the right thing to do. During the war, he became good friends with a man only known as Mitch, who supposedly came from money but had joined against his parents' wishes because he believed in freedom for all. Again, grain of salt. The two of them were in the same regiment and made it through alive, though some relatives say Mitch lost a leg or an arm in the war. Fast forward to the end of the war, and John and his new wife Mary, he'd met during the war, used the money he'd earned to set up a small shop on the East Coast. Most common city mentioned is Boston, in a small neighborhood. The shop became successful, John being a charming man and surprisingly savvy businessman. The neighborhood he'd set it up in quickly grew as the city grew, meaning there were always customers who needed whatever it was he sold. I've heard everything from groceries to workers' tools. They lived happily and had 3 children together during the time, spending a decade there, when suddenly, presumably accompanied by the roar of thunder and screeches of crows, Mr. Business arrived in town. Mr. Business has apparently been on the wrong side of the war and fought quite hard to keep his slaves, but was also smart enough to sell out other racists when he saw how the tides of the war were rolling, getting by with no losses except his free laborers. This had been the beginning of the end for his once successful plantation farm, as all the workers he could find to replace his slaves had wanted things like pay for their services. Unbelievable, I know. He'd struggled to find loyal workers that didn't charge more than the absolute minimum, and after a series of bad harvests, he'd chosen to pack up, sell his land, and head east to find a new source of income. He arrived and began buying up local businesses that seemed profitable and eventually found out about John's successful store. He was more than happy to discuss a fair price for the store until he saw the skin color of the owner. 10 years, not enough time to erase a lifetime of institutionalized racism. He began harassing John to sell his rinky-dink store and find a farm to work on. Don't quote me. Offering way below the actual value. And when laughed out of the store, he began trying to sabotage John's business. He got thugs to throw rocks through windows, sabotage deliveries, and just made a general scene in the store. John soldiered on though, having grown tragically used to fighting against racism. He also had a lot of friends in the community who helped keep the store floating. At the time, John's oldest son, who was about 13 or 14, found himself getting beaten up heading home at night from his job. Again, the details here are blurry, and wound up with a lot of scars that he'd supposedly be stuck with for his entire life. John had had enough, and as luck would have it, had an out, having been contacted by his old friend Mitch. Mitch was starting up a plantation of his own in the southwest and needed loyal workers. He'd offered John a foreman position, good pay, and a plot of land to live on with his family. This, dear readers, is when the revenge plan begins. John contacted Mr. Business, offering to sell at 75% of what the shop was actually worth, and maybe because his other businesses hadn't worked out, he took it. However, John supplied the contracts and proper solicitor to make things legal. The contract basically said that after the midnight of the date of signing, the shop and everything inside would transfer ownership to Mr. Business. Little did he know that that day, up until midnight, the shop was having a massive clearance sale, selling everything at discount prices to a grateful neighborhood. When they closed up that night and mailed the keys to Mr. Business, there was little left to sell in the store, if anything. John never found out what happened next, as they left town soon after and never returned. But personally, I'd like to think that Mr. Business arrived with his workers to an empty store with no deliveries coming, screaming and crying in the mud as he realized he'd been outsmarted by a lesser species. John and his family moved to work at Mitch's farm for the rest of their lives, John supposedly passing away in his 60s. Thank you for reading. Again, a lot of this is probably embellished, if not straight up a fairy tale, but my family all treat it as a true story, and I felt it was too good of a story to not share here. And there we go, guys. That is the end of that one. As OP even admits, he doesn't really know how much of of it is legit, but I don't really think that really matters, to be honest. The whole point of it is that it's a wonderful story. A black man getting revenge on a slave owner who wants to continue owning slaves, and I wouldn't even have blamed him, to be honest, if he went a step further and got violent, to be fair. Steal my meds, enjoy divorce, jail, joblessness, and sleeping in your car. 16 years ago, I made a friend one day on the bus. Up until about a year ago, I considered this guy a member of my family. Let's call this guy Joel. So, I keep a crystal bowl on the mantle above my fireplace, full of my medical marijuana. I started noticing that after poker night, my bowl seemed a lot emptier than it should, so I set up a camera to see which one of my guests was helping themselves when my back was turned. Next poker night, once everyone was gone, I pull up the video. There Joel was, plain as day, stuffing like $60 worth of medication into his pockets. I sent him the video and told him he had to return my medication or pay for it, and I told him that if he chose to do neither, he should no longer consider me a friend. He denied it. Even with the video staring him in the face, he said he hadn't taken anything. He even had the nerve to act offended by the fact that I accused him. So I decided to ruin his life. Over the years, he's told me a lot of things he didn't want his wife to know. Affairs, shady stuff he did with their joint funds, drug issues, terrible things he said about her mother, and her sister. I went back through all of our messages and took screenshots of everything secret he'd ever said to me. There were over 70 pictures. And, well, I sent his wife the screenshots. Here are some examples of the kind of stuff that was in those screenshots. He admitted to cheating on her with 8 different women over the course of our friendship, taking money they were saving for a car and using it to buy drugs, specifically Xanax and perks. The fact that he was continuing to do drugs after he promised her he was clean and sober. Here are some of the things he said about her and her family. She's a vile, disgusting woman, and the reason they never have sex is that he can't stand the smell in between her folds. He also said he was pretty sure she was molesting her niece. He said that all of her friends only pretend to like her so they can buy oxys off her. Also, as I'm editing this, I just remembered that he said he wanted to get one of his side chicks pregnant because he'd always resented his wife for being infertile. Here are some things he said about her sister. Her sister is an insane harpy. Her sister abuses her kids. This is not true, by the way, he just said it. Her sister is faking her autoimmune disease for attention. And now about his wife's mum. Her mum is a fat, lazy cow who doesn't actually need to be in a wheelchair. She just likes not having to stand up or bathe herself, so she's malingering. There were more things, but that's what came to mind without me having to dig through the screenshots I sent. His wife obviously filed for divorce and reported him to the police for the drugs he had in their house. While he was doing his 8 months in jail for the pot that he stole from me, his boss filled his position and he lost his job. His now ex-wife won't let him in the house. Now he lives in a car and showers at truck stops. I found out about the aftermath in parts. Some came from his ex-wife. She told me about the divorce, kicking him out and getting him arrested. Some came from a guy Joel and I used to both be friends with, who works at the place Joel used to work at. He told me about the job loss, car living, and the truck stop thing. I'm actually still on good terms with his ex-wife. I even sent her some enchiladas the other day for Cinco de Mayo. I also sent the video to all of our mutual friends, so he lost 90% of his social circle. I cut that other 10% out of my own life since they want to associate with known thieves. Birds of a feather, I guess. I mean, to be completely honest, mate, I don't really know why you were friends with this guy in the first place, because I think of all the bad things he's done. All the stuff that he's texted to you, the fact that, you know, he just seems like a horrible person in general. He openly admits to cheating on his wife, doing drugs. Clearly, this guy is a terrible person. I don't really think you should have been friends with him in the first place. And yes, obviously now the revenge is perfect, but a weird one even in the first place, in my opinion. Don't cheat on your graduation lifeline. So, I, a 19-year-old male, and my now ex-girlfriend, who's 18, had been together for more than a year when this story took place. We were in the same class during middle school and high school, a 2-year friendship eventually evolving into a relationship. You all know how it is. We were happily together, at least so I thought, since December 2019. I thought everything was great between us the whole time, although recently, about March, I noticed her becoming very distant and barely writing first, dry texting, etc. I asked her multiple times if everything was okay, and I gave her some space, but it continued for the next few months. I was naturally very upset, as I'd been through hell and back together with her when she was going through depression and a really hard time at the end of 2020. It suddenly felt like all this time was wasted and worth nothing. I, as a naive high schooler, truly believed that she was the one. It was serious after all. We matched perfectly together. We spent about 3 full months crying together at night when she was going through a rough time. We had similar plans for the future, similar interests, and it seemed we were meant for each other. My girlfriend, let's call her Caroline, was studying to become a lawyer, so she was mostly into humanity subjects. I, on the other hand, am studying biochem for medical school. I apologize if this is all confusing or different. We live in Europe. She was required to attend at least one science subject to graduate: physics, biology, chemistry, or psychology. Now, she always hated these subjects and just took them because they were necessary to graduate. She ended up picking chemistry, as I was a natural, and tutored 9th and 10th graders chemistry in my free time, and I always helped her with her assignments and more. It started as me helping her before her exams and assignments, so she could get a good pass grade. But after her rough time, it warped into me writing half of the assignments for her. In February, she started to do everything with me again though. We had online the whole time. Anyways, enough backstory. After noticing Caroline started to get distant and never properly answered my questions regarding her behavior, I wanted to see how far it would go. For 1 week, I didn't invite her, call her, text her first, and in a total of 1 week, she called me 3 times. Twice to ask me about her assignments, and once telling me how she felt insecure and bad. Look, I'm not a horrible person. I helped her out with her school stuff, and I comforted her when she felt down. Me, being the naive, love is perfect love burk I am, I just chalked it up to her feeling depressed again, but feeling embarrassed about it. I continued helping and comforting her for the next month, until nothing changed, and she never opened up. I was honestly doubting everything by then. Is it me? What am I doing wrong? Etc. I tried everything I could. Eventually, I asked her friends if something had happened, but they said she was the same as always towards them. So I knew then something was up, but I didn't know what it was yet. One day, when she came over to my place, it was only the second time she did that in March. Usually, she used to come at least twice a week. We were sitting in my room and talking while she was trying out Valorant. After this, she went to my kitchen to make herself something, and I heard a notification on her phone. Now, I'm usually not a snooper, but I had a quick look at her screen that lit up. I wouldn't be able to read the message or know who it was anyways. It was a Discord notification. I was very surprised by this. I knew for a fact that she didn't have Discord about a month ago. Plus, she only plays Minecraft once in a while. She never uses Discord or anything. So the next morning, I did some snooping, and sure enough, I found a whole other Instagram account of hers where she branded herself to be an aesthetic gamer girl. Not that there's anything wrong with that, it was just new to me. She'd never told me about any of this. I couldn't find any of her friends following her on that account either. Sure enough, she had her Discord username in her bio. Now, curious and to be honest, butthole me decided it would be a good idea to create a throwaway account and try and text her and see what she was all about. Now, before you all complain about me, I know I was being a butthole here. I was just curious. So then, after texting her on my new account, we talked for a bit until she became flirty. We played a few games of Bed Wars together, once again on a throwaway account I bought for $1. I kind of broke down and started questioning my sanity. I'd been with her all this time and through so much hardship, I couldn't believe she'd do this to me. Guys, I kind of guessed that they weren't using voice chat when they were playing Minecraft, otherwise it would probably be a little bit obvious. After the sadness came the anger. I just wanted to know how far she'd taken this. I found it hard to believe that she'd casually flirt with guys like this. After setting up my first recon mission plan, I found out more about her until I found out about her supposed boyfriend. At that point, I had a huge emotional breakdown and I felt as if I'd wasted so much time helping someone who would betray me like this. From her Instagram stories, I'd found out later they were sleeping with each other for a whole month by now. This was about when her behavior started to change initially. It's all adding up now. At this point, I started to hatch my revenge plan. I knew I wouldn't let her off the hook this easily. So I spent 2 weeks pulling all-nighters, making sure I had all my work done till the end of the year, until graduation that is. I spent all my remaining time creating fake chemistry textbook pages so I could make my pro-revenge more believable. All of the information was wrong. I knew I had to give her a taste of her own medicine, betray her like she had me. For the remaining 2 months of the school year, I fed her her all of this fake information and made sure she got all of her assignments wrong. I knew she wouldn't be able to tell anyone she was copying off me, as our high school had a very, very, very strict rule for plagiarism. As much as 3 small cheating attempts on small exams could get you expelled. So, after letting the pot stew for those 2 painful, awful months, I let the poop hit the fan. As our teacher had to handle an outrageous amount of classes, she always checked our assignments late, often by 2 or 3 months, all at once. I knew I could use this fact to my advantage. After my girlfriend submitted her final assignments that were worth a huge percentage of our final graduation grades, I told her I knew about her shenanigans that had still been going on for the 3 entire months at this point. I told her how she'd hurt me and how it would come back to haunt her. I made sure of that. She mostly brushed it off and acted as if I were the villain, as I couldn't just leave her, and that she was only friends with that guy. Although I told her something was going to happen, I never told her what it was going to be. Trust me, she never saw this coming. 1 week later, the end of year results rolled around. When we received our final grades, I was over the moon, as I'd passed with flying colors. On the other hand, her not so much. Due to her final assignments and all quarter 4 work equaling an F, she called me crying and asking for help. She told me she wouldn't be able to graduate if she didn't receive at least a passing grade for this year. She told me our teacher gave her a final chance after telling her how disappointed she was. Caroline has 2 more months at school with an extra one-on-one online lessons with our saint of a teacher. Honestly, props go out to her. To be honest, I felt really bad for her and her situation, knowing very well that if she didn't work her butt off in those 2 months in a subject she hated, she'd have to repeat the last year, without someone constantly helping her with her chem this time. That compassion, though, quickly went away, and I told her I would help her, but only if she apologized and paid me my regular tutoring fees. Caroline went full on ballistic after that, and screamed at me. How could I do this to her? I hung up, and she called me a few seconds after, apologizing and agreeing to pay for my help. She now has 2 months of intense memorizing with her ex if she wants to graduate. Oh my god. And there we go, everyone. That is the end of that pro-revenge story. I mean, it's only pro-revenge. It's not the most insane revenge story that I've ever heard or told on this channel. But if you think about it, the ramifications on OP's ex-girlfriend could genuinely turn out to be nuclear. She was leeching off of his good work the entire year, probably even longer, let's be realistic, from the start of their relationship. Now she has to do a subject that she hates along with the rest of her entire year, and she has no help. So I think she could be in the mud. And think about it. If she never graduates, if she never passes, her whole life could be in tatters just because she cheated on her boyfriend who was helping her so much. Not even just with assignments, but in life in general. When you're going through a period of depression, you can lean on someone like that and, talk to them about your problems and cry with them at night. Why then throw that all back in their face? I don't understand it personally, but hey, she got her comeuppance and that is justice served. Let's be realistic.